The Washington elite has lost its mind, especially as it comes regards this war in Russia and Ukraine and what the United States is going to do about it. They have completely lost touch with reality. And I'm being pretty strong about this because you're going to see about this, the consequences and the cost is getting real high. Now I'm standing here at Penn Station in New York City because later on today, I'm going to be having a debate with some of these Washington elites, some former secretaries of state, along with our friend John Mearsheimer. And we're going to be laying out the rational policy, the one that's based on reality, and they're going to be pitching the other side. It's going to be on the Council of Foreign Relations. It'll be available to the public sometime in mid-April. We'll let you know how that is. But it is really hard to understand how, given the facts as we see them, that so many continue to cling to this just outright fiction that can't be sustained by the reality on the ground. And I'm going to show you exactly what we're talking about here. Earlier today, I saw this while I was on the train coming up here. There's a piece in the Washington Post by Robert Kagan that basically says, hey, well, it doesn't basically, it says right there, Trump anti-Ukraine view is dates back to the 1930s, and America rejected it. Will they now? Now, going into that story there, if you go into the article, a lot of the things he says are just plain crazy. It's ironic because he starts off, it's a very lengthy article, actually. He starts off by saying, talking about the conditions that were in 1930. He's basically saying the America's neutrality status before the war, many wanted isolationism. They called it America First. He's trying to draw a direct parallel to that and say that they were disastrously wrong then and they're disastrously wrong now. Then he does something kind of odd and he paints this picture which actually shows that there are some dramatic differences globally between that situation and this situation, though he tries to make them somehow the same. So, for example, he talks about how Hitler had just rolled over most of Europe. So about 9 months from September 1939 until about June 1940, Hitler rolled over Poland, France, and all the way to the English coast and had the significant amount of Europe under his control. It was right up across the British Islands and where the British Army actually escaped to Dunkirk, or over Dunkirk is a very famous battle there. And so then he's saying, we took a while before we actually got into the war, and then it says, isolation. Then he draws this very long historical document that shows, how all that actually transpired. And while much of that is accurate in terms of what happened, it's what he doesn't tell you that is so crucial to this one, because he's trying to tell you that Trump's, what he claims is isolation, is analogous to that, and the consequences could be just as severe here. And that is where he falls horribly flat. So, for example, he talks about, all what Hitler had done here. And by the end of June 1940, he was at the English Channel and owned most of Europe. But what he doesn't tell you is that the analog, what he's basically trying to draw Hitler to Putin, is that Putin has, after 2 years and 1 month, so 9 months, Hitler had the most of Europe. After 9 months, Putin has 17% of one country on its border, and that's it. Hitler didn't have nuclear weapons. Putin has nuclear weapons. That's a little different from 1940. Hitler had, at the end of that time, a continental army and a massive land army, air force, huge air force at the time, navy, and an industrial capacity that could make good on his declared continental aspirations, which, of course, then he tried to go into, take Russia as well as the Soviet Union at the time. So all of those things were true. That's exactly what happened then. What about today? What about Putin? Does he have continental aspirations? To the contrary, he does not. Neither does he have the capacity. Even if he wanted to do that, as I've told you many times, he doesn't have the capacity at all. And he doesn't need to attack this because he does have nuclear weapons. NATO has nuclear weapons. And that would have radically changed the outcome in 1940 if both sides' alliances had nuclear weapons. But they didn't. So that's why that situation is not analogous to what's going on here. But the Washington elite doesn't want to make that play. It doesn't want to make that now a connection to reality. That is just mind-boggling. And let's see, because at the heart of Kagan's argument, and really most of elite Washington, they want you to believe that a neo-Fuhrer in Putin is going to come rolling across the plains of Europe again, just like Hitler, the first one did back in 1940, 1945. You're going to have another major war, and the United States is going to have to get in it. That's the play. We will have to fight in there. And you've probably heard that many times on regular news channels and certainly on ours. But is that true? Is that even possible? How possible is it that Putin will roll into NATO, that there will be another war, and that we should fight? And if we don't help Ukraine win, then we're going to have a bigger war later. That's the gist of their argument. Is it true? Well, it's not true. And I'm going to show you it's not here. So first of all, let's look back in February where Tucker Carlson went to Moscow to interview Vladimir Putin. And he asked him specifically about this. So what are your aspirations? What is he saying? Because remember, Hitler said in Mein Kampf and several other places he had aspirations to go more. What does Putin say?
Well, the argument, I know you know this, is that, well, he invaded Ukraine. He has territorial aims across the continent. And you're saying unequivocally you don't.
It is absolutely out of the question. You just don't have to be any kind of analyst. It goes against common sense to get involved in some kind of a global war. And a global war will bring all humanity to the brink of destruction. It's obvious.
So he says he doesn't have any aspiration, but why would you ever trust him, right? Who cares what Putin says? It only matters what he does. Well, as I say, it doesn't even, first of all, it doesn't matter so much what he does, is what he can do. And it's the capacity and the capability. That's what it was during the Cold War. That's what Reagan looked a lot at. What can you do? What is the capability of our potential adversaries? That's what drove a lot of our defense operations and spending here. So Putin actually addressed that earlier today when he was talking to some of his troops, and they had a camera on him. And note what he says here, because ironically, what he says here is numerically accurate.
США тратят на оборонный расход, у них составляют примерно 40% от общемировых расходов на оборону. 39% общемировых расходов это США, а Россия 3,5%. И мы что, вот имея в виду вот это соотношение, собираемся воевать с НАТО, что ли? Ну это просто бред.
So Vladimir Putin doesn't have the intent, and he doesn't have the capacity. By his own acknowledgement, he recognizes defense spending for the United States and NATO is overwhelming massively against Russia. They can't compete against it conventionally. He said that many times, and it's just look on the paper. It's clear as can be. Look at the reality on the ground. It's completely clear that our capacity conventionally dwarfs everything that the Russians have in every capacity. He could not go conventionally into us. But that does not stop Vladimir Zelensky from claiming he does.
Якщо в Європу, а ракети, як я сказав, вже залітають, якщо в Європу прийде Путін, прийде ця агресія, прийде його армія, солдати Сполучених Штатів, громадяни Сполучених Штатів Америки прийдуть і будуть захищати цю Європу. Бо це члени НАТО. І тому дуже швидко війна може прийти в Сполучені Штати.
But you know who else doesn't have capacity? Ukraine doesn't have the capacity. If you take a look at the capacity that Ukraine has with all of the stuff that we've been giving them from the beginning, and you take a look at what Russia has from the beginning, but now especially going forward, after 2 years of war, after Ukraine broke their teeth on the Russian defense in 2023, and they aren't even a fraction of the recovery from that. Whereas Russia is continuing to build up its economic potential, its military industrial potential with rockets, artillery shells, tanks, ammunition, new categories of weapons fired from the air, precision guided munitions. And of course, millions of rounds of ammunition, and they're getting stuff from North Korea. Every capacity that you want to look, Russia is on the top. But Ukraine is dwindling in all these capacities. And if you need any proof for that, ask Zelensky that too.
We have almost no artillery remaining.
Last month, you said if we have American support, we will win. If we don't have American support, we will lose.
It's true.
Well, and that's partially true. They are running out of ammunition. And if they don't get that help from us in the terms of more money from Congress, which means more ammunition, then they'll lose. What's not true is that if they get it, they'll win. They can succeed. Listen, folks, let me just tell you categorically, point blank, from all of my combat experience, all of my training, all of my experiences that I've gained throughout 20-something years in the military, there is no path at all under any circumstances that Ukraine is going to win this war. There is no rational path to that. It is evident on the ground. All those things I just told you make it overwhelmingly so. Anyone who wants to claim that Ukraine can't lose, that Russia must lose, that if we just give more money, it's going to win, they have to show you on the ground how that's going to work. They have to be able to say, okay, here's this imbalance in artillery shields. Here's how that's going to reverse. Or here's how the issue in the air is reversed, is in Russia's favor. Here's how it's going to reverse. Ad infinitum. Each category, every category, you have to do that. They can't because it doesn't exist. And if you're thinking, yeah, but those F-16s are coming, man, any day that's going to flip the situation there, Putin addressed that today as well.
Ну, во-первых, если они поставят F-16, об этом говорят, вроде пилотов готовят, я думаю, что вы это понимаете, как никто другой, лучше других. Эта ситуация на поле боя не поменяет. И мы будем уничтожать их самолеты так же, как мы уничтожаем сегодня их танки, бронемашины и другую технику, в том числе систему залпового оружия. Но, конечно, если они будут применяться с аэродромов третьих стран, они для нас становятся легитимной целью, где бы они ни находились.
You catch that right there at the end. It's not just that F-16s aren't magic and they can get shot down just like any other plane can. And it's not just that the Russians have overwhelming superiority in air defense systems that Ukraine can never match or even come close to it. There's nothing magic about F-16. They'll get shot down just like any other aircraft would. And Russia has like over 1,000 combat aircraft to a handful. Even if they get a whole squadron of F-16s, it's not going to make any difference in the operational and strategic battlefield. But Russia and Putin there just said that if those F-16s launch from third countries and they come and attack Russian forces in this theater, they become legitimate targets. Ergo, targets that could be accessed outside of Ukraine. So if we want to play, Russian roulette, forgive the pun, and see if we can expand this, let some of those jets fly from NATO countries and see what's going to happen. That would be the most foolish thing that we could do. And listen, those F-16s, even as few as they are, they have to have special runway capacities. They're not as robust as the older Soviet stuff that the Ukraine Air Force has been flying. And they've been doing lots of upgrades, and Russia attacked one of them just the other day, I think 2 days ago, knocking it out of operation. Now it's going to take a lot longer to get back, even if they get the jets. And that will be a constant situation because Ukraine doesn't have the capacity. So the question may come up, if they can't launch from their operational bases in Ukraine, will they launch from NATO countries? You better hope that our NATO leaders are smart and don't fall into that emotional situation and go and allow them to do it, because Putin has laid the marker down. He's going to knock those airfields out, and they're going to be legitimate targets. Let's don't find out if he's bluffing on that. There's no reason to think he is. Now, fortunately, everybody is not in this situation. There have been a couple recently. People in the West have been saying, you know what, maybe it is time to consider some things. And here's this headline actually from the administration itself in Politico. This was just, I believe, yesterday. It says Ukraine needs to open up about the truths of the battlefield. And you go in there and read that, and James Rubin, an administration official, is saying to Zelensky, he needs to start being honest. And of course, as I argued, that he's not being honest at all by continuing to say that he's going to win. That's still his position, even this day, that he's going to win. And I'm sorry, but as I pointed out, there is no rational path. So the administration's saying you need to be honest. And then there's actually, here's something else. What this was actually just today. This one's a little bit more even crazy. This is from the Times of London, where they also are saying, hey, it's time for us to start contemplating the possibility that Kiev falls. Because all across the front line, Ukraine forces continue to be moved back further and further and further. Russia is building up more and more weapon systems, more and more troops. And now that there's also lots of warnings that the Russians are actually in the process of launching an even larger offensive on top of what they've been doing for months successfully. And if the Ukraine lines get brittle enough, they could actually crack and break somewhere. And Russia does have operational reserves that could pour through any crack and just go into the Russian Ukrainian rear. And they're already trying right now like crazy to build more defensive lines, but they waited too late. They waited months too late. They should have done this starting in November of last year, and then they would have been in pretty good shape right now, but they didn't. And so now that they're at risk, literally, of collapsing. And so it's not out of the question that something like that could happen, that Kiev later on could be put at risk. There's already lots of attacks, aerial attacks in Kharkiv. Many in Kharkiv are starting now to abandon the city. Many of the civilians are starting to leave because they fear that that might be the target of Russia's next offensive. And the Russians have been laying the groundwork for that in preparation of the battlefield, but they've also been doing it in other locations as well. So we don't know yet where that's going to come. But folks, you see, everywhere you look on the ground, reality on the ground screams that this war is lost. Why in God's name would we want to take $60 billion more and throw it into something that cannot succeed because we are arrogantly unwilling to acknowledge tacit reality on the ground? It is time to do that. And I couldn't have said it any better than my colleague here, who I'm going to be debating with here shortly, put it on our show just the other day. He talked about this same problem and offers an alternative solution.
We've reached the point where we're so blinded by our rage towards the Russians that we're unable to see straight. We're unable to recognize that this war is a lost cause, and that the best possible outcome for us at this point in time, and certainly the best possible outcome for the Ukrainians, is to get some sort of negotiated settlement. It just makes no sense to continue this war. But nevertheless, we're so deeply committed now to beating the Russians, to not letting them win. We're so enraged by what Putin has done that we are just unwilling to quit. We just want to double down at every turn.
And we cannot double down any further, especially on because you know why? You know what drives me so much here is not only that America is embarrassing itself by continuing to pursue something that almost all of the rest of the world see is ridiculous and can't be accomplished, because the bill payers for this are the Ukrainian people. You had Senator Lindsey Graham the other day go to Kiev and encourage more of them to go and fight on the front lines and say, y'all need to get more people out there fighting. I think he said it again yesterday. He is trying to encourage more men to go to a pointless death. It is immoral, in my view, to continue to encourage them to go to the battlefield in larger numbers, because there is no path to win. If we spend $60 billion, if they get more people mobilized, it won't change the outcome. It will delay the end, and it will come at the cost of thousands, probably tens of thousands of additional men who are alive right now as I'm making this video, who will be dead possibly within days. And certainly as time continues to go on, more of them will pointlessly die. More cities will be lost, more territory will be lost, and it literally may be Kharkiv or Kiev even as the final toll, instead of making that negotiated settlement right now. That is why I'm so passionate about this, because men's lives are at stake, and they are just being thrown into a meat grinder with no possibility of success. I don't care what anybody in Washington wants to tell you. That, my friend, is the core truth. And it doesn't, and they can say what they want all day long, but I hope that more of them, like those two headlines I showed, just start to see more of the light and fewer of this nonsense that was in the Washington Post today. Men die because of that kind of lies. And that is your deep dive for today. I got to cut this short now because I got to get ready to go to this debate later on tonight here in New York. And I will see you probably tomorrow, probably here again in New York City. We'll come back to you again on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.